Good morning, Metalheads Unit. Welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown, and today we are taking a look at all of the albums I missed in July 2019. July hasn't been quite as impressive as other months in 2019 have, which isn't to say that there haven't been standout releases. Take, for instance, the latest records from Tumult and Immortal Bird, both of which coming off a $20 spin, who are on a roll pretty much at this point. Every album they release is fucking dynamite. An amazing record from Lingua Ignota Year, which, by the way, has officially kicked Full of Hell out of my top 5 albums of the year, so that should give you an idea as to how much I'm fucking loving that record. But there have also been a lot of duds. Thy Art is Murder, for instance, put out what I would honestly consider to be their weakest and most unenjoyable record to date. Batushka attempted to recover from some serious drama, but ultimately released one of the more controversial records of the summer, and one of the more disappointing ones as well. Even a literal metal god, David Ellefson of Megadeth, managed to release a particularly underwhelming and underdeveloped record in the form of Sleeping Giants, which I compared to the likes of 13 and Super Collider in my official review. But hey, not every album can be a winner, and on the bright side, all of these albums combined made for some of the best videos that I think I've put on the Metal Meltdown, and clearly y'all agree, because I have officially passed 666 subscribers. I am literally bigger than the number of the beast. Ha 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 ha! But, as usual, in the midst of all that controversy, all that praise, all those noteworthy records, there's always stuff that we miss. So today we'll be looking at just a couple of those records. The first of which being The Space Between Us from the one and only Scott Stapp, released July 19th via Napalm Records. I don't know if this applies to the rest of YouTube or the metal community, but in my experience, mentioning Scott Stapp is like the kiss of fucking death. Y'all Scott Stapp fans are fucking salty and vile and crazy. The last time I mentioned Scott on this channel, I reviewed an Art of Anarchy record, the only record that Scott recorded with the band, and I attempted to stay open-minded through the whole thing. I was honest. I think I was pretty fair, all things considered. And y'all responded with some really nasty fucking comments. I didn't realize Scott Stapp and Creed has such a massive, dedicated cult-like following, but here we are. So for that reason, I'm just going to go ahead and state immediately that while I don't think I have a bias towards Scott Stapp, clearly everyone else on planet Earth does. So maybe, if you're a super diehard fan, don't take everything I say super seriously. I mean, in general, don't, because I would like to think we're all adults and we can make up our own minds, but, you know, it's YouTube, so I can't really expect that from everyone. More importantly, to the point of this record, this is fine. It's perfectly fine. It's kind of edgy, too edgy for my liking. I find it kind of generic and bland. There's nothing really that unique about it, but it's performed competently. Scott Stapp is going into some pretty personal places lyrically, and vocally, I would even say this is one of his stronger releases. He's doing a lot less of the classic Pearl Jam Eddie Vedder impersonation Jarl that he used to put into a lot of his stuff. But yeah, for me, that just makes it kind of bland. I mean, the fun of Creed was that it had these super fucking crunchy metallic riffs alongside a man doing one of the worst Eddie Vedder impersonations I've ever heard in my life. Whereas this, by comparison, is safer and calmer and better, but not nearly as fun. Like I said, I might be biased because Metal Master Kingdom gave this a 9 out of 10, and they straight up said if you don't like Scott Stapp, you're not going to like this record. So there you have it, I guess. I'm just going to leave it at this. I never thought I would miss the days of "with arms wide open" until I heard this record. Let's just leave it at that. Next up is Metawar by 3TEETH, release July 2nd via Century Media Records. I came this fucking close to reviewing Metawar, and I ultimately chose Immortal Bird over this record, which I think objectively was the better decision, because God bless that comment section on that video. And I also kind of figured that I don't really have a lot to say about this record, because I don't. I think it's loud and hectic and crazy, and sometimes that works to the album's advantage by making it feel really tense and powerful and maniacal, but other times it just feels like a big cluttered industrial slog, a collage of noises and metallic grating guitars and Marilyn Manson, Nine Inch Nails vibes and aesthetics. Even in its most energetic and inspired moments, it is still so over fucking produced and overwritten, and I really think it hurts it. I do like that the band puts like a new sinister edge on that fucking Foster the People song, Pumped Up Kids, even if it does compromise the upbeat tendencies of that track, the nice melody that it supports. But yeah, overall I'm not really super into this. I'm happy that everyone else is. You know, I think it is probably one of the more interesting and intelligent records to come out in the world of industrial metal, alongside Author and Punisher, of course. But nothing super noteworthy, and I don't think I'll revisit this band unless they really fucking tone down on some of the sound choices in the production mix here. Next up is Afterburner by Kryptos, released June 21st? Okay. Yeah, honestly, I was looking forward to this album, and I wasn't sure what the release date was. I was originally told it was in June, and then I was told it was sometime in July, and now I'm finding out it was actually June all along. Okay, well, we're already here, so I may as well talk about this record. It's a cool record. It's very cool. It's a very fun record. They're from India, a part of the world that isn't really known for their contributions to heavy metal, and they play a really cool mixture of a lot of early 80s metal sounds, a lot of speed metal, new wave British heavy metal, with dashes of first wave black metal thrown into the mix via some of the vocals and aesthetic choices. It's not the most technically proficient or original record ever made, but it is very fun, very engaging, very accessible, very brutish, and I think that anyone who loves old school heavy metal is going to have a real fucking blast with this, particularly if, like me, you weren't impressed by the more recent records from either versions of Venom. To expand on that, this honestly does remind me of Venom with more melodic sensibilities and stronger performances, but without compromising the punky, blackened heart. Definitely recommend this. I'm upset that I couldn't tell anyone more about this a little sooner, but c'est la vie. Who knows? Maybe it was my own fault. Maybe I misread something somewhere. But doesn't matter now. The record's out. Check it out. Next up, the Decaying Light from Disentomb, released July 12th via Unique Leader Records. I don't get it. I really don't get the love for this. Maybe I'm in the minority. I find that that's pretty common when it comes to some of these super underground death metal bands, but to me this just sounds like a bunch of classic underground death metal tropes thrown into a blender, swished around and regurgitated, and it's by no means incompetent, but I think there's objectively way better written and performed stuff out there. Like, okay, it's brutal, great, what does that tell me about the songwriting or the performances or anything? It just tells me it's brutal. You know, it would be like describing a ballad as sad. Okay, but is it good? Because ballads aren't good because they're sad. They're good because they're good. They usually say something, you know? Yeah, I guess if you just want a bunch of brutal riffs, then go fucking nuts. But again, I think there's way better stuff out there. I mean, just look at 20 Bucks Spin. They've been releasing a slew of killer death metal this last month, and I would happily recommend any of those records over this. It's pretty easy for me to do that, actually. Next up, the Metaportal EP from Wormed, released July 19th via Season of Mist. Yeah, okay, you can honestly just kind of take what I said about Disentomb and copy-paste it here. Robert, this is tech stuff. This isn't... this is different. Yeah, I guess you are right, objectively, but I don't know, it still suffers from the same kinds of problems. It still is a collection of tropes, cliches, regurgitated, and it's fine. It's not incompetent, but I just think there's better stuff out there. It's, once again, really that simple. I guess this benefits from being a much shorter listen, so there's that, I guess. I don't know. Go listen to Tumult instead, honestly. Pretty sure I've got an upstairs neighbor listening to Law and Order right now. It's pretty loud. I can hear. I don't know if it'll show up in the video, but I can hear it through the walls. The joys of a basement apartment, ladies and gentlemen. But alas, we're moving on, and we're moving on to the new record from False entitled Portent, released July 12th via Gilead Media. This is actually a record that I wish I had reviewed, because I think this is bringing a much more emotional, personal, affectionate, lyrical aspect to the world of black metal. We're straying away from demons and monsters and Satan and Vikings and shit. And instead, False is bringing in their own experiences, their own traumas, their own pain to tell really powerful little stories, and it's emboldened by super vicious, abrasive, traditional black metal with these wonderful melodic tinges. Every moment on this record is super impressive and engaging and powerful. Sure, the songs do stretch on way longer than your average track. I think the longest song on here is actually 16 and a half minutes long, but the record itself still comes in to a close at a sharp 41 minutes. It weirdly reminds me of Pleiades Dust from Gorguts in that sense, which was a album that also was relatively short and also kind of moved in one continuous piece. I know that that's like tech death and avant-garde, but I don't know what to tell you. Point being is that this is a really great fucking record, and it's the kind of record that I wish we would see more of from the world of black metal. And I know for certain if this thing gets released on vinyl anytime soon, I will definitely be picking it up, because I'm excited to come back to this and continue to dissect it and learn more about this band. If I had reviewed this, I'd probably give it a 4 out of 5, leaning towards a 4.5 out of 5. Definitely fucking check this out. Next up, the debut album from Enforced entitled At the Walls, released July 14th via War Records. It's literally what it's called, War Records 2, and if you type in At the Walls Enforced on Google, it literally shows up in like all caps, War Records. It's kind of great. I like this record. I like how bleak it is. I like how blunt it is. I like how vicious it is. Enforced, not really bringing a whole lot new to the world of thrash and crossover music, but I don't think they're trying to. I think that they're just trying to bring their own youthful spirit into it. They're trying to bring their own perspective into it, and they're just trying to play some great fucking songs and have a good time. And that's exactly what they do. And may I add, they also put on a great show. I actually saw this band opening for Iron Regan, Sacred Reich, and Exciter at Lee's Palace back in May. And I was just as impressed then as I am now. Unfortunately, there's just not much else to talk about as far as the music and content is concerned. It's nobody's fault. It's just a pretty easy record to read and understand. Which, on the bright side, makes it also a very accessible record. Perhaps if you're brand new to a lot of crossover and thrash metal, this would be a cool record to check out. And obviously, if you're just a diehard fan, check this out. This is probably one of the more solid and dependable releases that I've heard from this genre so far this year. This is another album that came very close to getting a review, and it just didn't. Had I done so, would have given it a 3.5 out of 5. A very enthusiastic one as well. Next up, the Gold and Silver Sessions EP from Elder, which I'm not really sure when this was released. It says here June 21st, but I was under the assumption that this was released July 12th. Maybe that was supposed to mean a physical version of the record came out on July 12th? I don't fucking know. I'm actually shocked nobody sent this my way, because I remember in the early days of the Metal Meltdown, even a couple years ago, people telling me to give Elder a listen. A prominent user in particular, Ty Tilly, who, as I've said before, is kind of an extreme metal connoisseur. Check out his Instagram page. But I remember getting messages from him a lot telling me to check out that record. And don't get me wrong, I did, and it was a really great record. But again, with all that in mind, I am very shocked that I didn't hear anything about this. Especially considering it's a really good album. It's a lot more chill than I was expecting, a lot more tranquil and peaceful, you know? The songs aren't quite as heavily laced as I remember them being on older Elder records, but it's still really enjoyable. I actually find myself really liking this more tranquil aspect of Elder. It feels different. It feels fresh for them. I don't know, maybe they've done it on another record, on another EP. Maybe I'm just not remembering it right. But whatever the case may be, it all eventually amounts to, I enjoyed this EP. The only issue I would say that I have is I think that some songs are a little bloated and they stretch on a little too long, but all things considered, the EP still wraps up at a good, sharp 33 minutes. So, that's still pretty fucking good. The final track in particular, I think prog nerds are going to get a real kick out of. It's 18 minutes of smooth guitars and great passages and just really good songwriting and performances. I definitely recommend this album, and I look forward to Elder expanding on this sound a little more on a future studio record. Next up, Rust on the Gates of Heaven from Where Your Wounds, released July 12th via Death Wish. This is a new project from Jacob Bannon of Converge. Almost reviewed this record, but I chose Lingua Ignota instead, and I do not regret that decision one fucking bit. He's playing a lot with psychedelic rock and ambient soundscapes and post-rock and post-metal with some more aggressive flares of music, but aggressive in the way that Death Heaven is aggressive on some of their more recent outputs. We're not dealing with like the super emotional, abrasive, melodic metalcore of Converge. We're dealing with something that is inherently a little more peaceful and atmospheric. And I think it's a mostly really interesting record. I do think that sometimes the band is meandering through all these kind of weird rhythms and parts that don't quite align, but it's still really interesting. I like hearing Jacob flex his lyrical and musical muscles a little bit more. I mean, granted, Converge is an insanely weird and diverse band, but I don't picture Converge doing a record quite like this either. So, this is still pretty different. We've had a slew of really emotional, experimental metal records this month. Again, that Lingua Ignota record included. So if you're looking for even more of that, I think this is a really good record to check out. But I would say that if you're an impatient listener, if you're not really into something maybe a little more emotional and tranquil, and you are maybe expecting something because it's Jacob Bannon more along the lines of Converge, then just go listen to Converge, I guess. Next up, I'm Losing Myself by An Isolated Mind. Yet another record where I'm not entirely sure what the fucking actual release date of this is. Like, I read the review on Angry Metal Guy, where I was made to believe that this came out in July, but Spotify says it came out sometime in March. And I figured, oh, well, maybe that means the physical CDs came out in July, but according to Bandcamp, those don't come out till much later in the year. So I'm lost. This is the third record in a row where I didn't get to review an album, mostly because I had no fucking clue when it actually came out. But, also much like those records, we're already here, so let's just fucking look at it. Okay? And I'm just gonna say, this was another very challenging record. Much like Lingua Ignota, it's an album by an artist who's coming from a very personal place. He's not talking about abuse, he's dealing with his own mental health issues, he's dealing with his own depression, his own personal demons, but it's the same effect, the same outcome, a similar execution. It's not quite as unique and characteristic as Lingua Ignota. I think that is way more dynamic, way more complex, and generally more powerful, but this still hits a lot of the same notes, and for that reason was still a pretty challenging listen for me, particularly coming off the heels of Lingua Ignota, which admittedly may have affected my initial reaction to this record. I would say that where Your Wounds is more musically dynamic, this is probably more competently arranged and definitely the more emotional of the two. So another case where if you enjoyed Lingua Ignota and you're looking for something similar, but in this case looking for something more similar, I would give this a shot. And if there ever is a vinyl release of this, I can't fucking tell. I'm not even sure when this was released digitally to begin with. But if there ever is, I will be on the lookout for it, because this is another record I would really like to spend more time dissecting and analyzing and digging into. Next up, Abhorrent Veneration from Carnal Tomb, released digitally July 26th via Testimony Records. A physical copy of this comes out in late July. Thank you to Testimony Records for helping me clarify this, unlike literally 3 of the albums we've looked at today. God damn, are release dates really that hard to figure out, people? I don't know, maybe I'm just an idiot. Actually, that might be it, come to think of it. Moving on. This is a cool record. This is a much more grisly and gruesome take on old school death metal, but old school death metal nonetheless. It's powerful, it's churning, it's kind of spooky, it's fun, it's kind of dumb, but again, kind of fun. Much like the previously mentioned Enforced record, it's not exactly going to win points for its originality, but also much like that Enforced record, I don't really care because, again, I feel like they're bringing their own subtle perspectives to the whole thing, and I just feel like the energy of this thing helps it pull through, and it's just a really fun, enjoyable record. It's very much in line with a lot of the underground gruesome death metal we've been hearing out of 20 Buck Spin, bands like Cerebral Rot, bands like Fetid, bands like Superstition and Tomb Mold, to the point where I can't help but wonder why 20 Buck Spin hasn't picked this up. So with that in mind, if you're really getting tired of giving all your money to 20 Buck Spin this summer, give this record a shot. You give it a listen, give your money to Testimony Records for a change. Your wallet's still gonna hurt, but at least it'll hurt in the most diverse way possible. And finally, Invasion by John 5 and the Creatures, released today on July 31st. For obvious reasons, I've not spent a lot of time with this record, but that's okay, because I don't think any of us have yet. Frankly, this is a record that I would have maybe thought of as a full review, but because I have a couple albums that I want to look at right away for the first weekend of August, I've decided I'm just going to talk about it really briefly here, and then maybe later on I'll explore it a little bit further at the end of another video, give you some more deep thoughts into it. We'll see. For now, I will say that this is an incredibly eclectic and crazy collection of straight-up guitar porn, for those of you who like that kind of stuff. I mean, John 5, not the biggest name in heavy metal, but a respected guitarist who has worked with shock rock legends like Rob Zombie and Marilyn Manson. And on top of that, he's worked with the likes of David Lee Roth and Rob Halford and Leonard Skinner, and he's released tons of other solo albums that are equally as funky and strange and bizarre. So he knows his shit, to say the least. He's like kind of an unsung guitar hero at this point. And I think that this is maybe one of the most characteristic and inventive things that he has made, at least in his solo career. It's super brash and weird and seemingly random at times, laid in with screeching guitar solos and slap bass and weird industrial riffs and synth parts and these weird horror movie kind of sound effects and screeches. I find it hard to believe that any casual listener would really get into this, but obviously if you're into a lot of instrumental rock, if you're into just weird avant-garde and experimental music, if you like artists like Buckethead and shit like that, you're gonna find a lot to enjoy here. So yeah, if by chance this is your first time hearing about this, which again seems likely since it literally just came out, I would definitely recommend you give this a shot, even if just out of curiosity, because there is some really weird and cool stuff on here. And I think that's it, or at least that's everything that I personally want to talk about. So I'm going to switch it over to you now. What albums do you think I missed in July 2019? What albums do you think I should be on the lookout for in the near future? What do you think was the best album of July, for that matter, since we mentioned it a little earlier in the video? What do you think? Let me know. Give me a call. Give me a shout out. Text, email, Skype, MySpace. As always, thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.